The whole story begins in a very fancy mansion, and it's a super beautiful sunny day outside. On the table, we see a ton of food that was prepared for a big celebration. They're congratulating young Master Isaac for getting into the Royal Academy at just 10 years old. His nanny comments that it's a happy day, so she prepared all of his favorite dishes. The boy with silver hair ends up smiling a little shyly at all the compliments. He then thanks the nanny, and we find out his name is Isaac von Goethe. At that same moment, a guy comes closer to give a present to the young master. The man explains that the gift is because Isaac ended up saving his son's life. With that, the boy decides to accept the gift graciously and thanks the man for the gesture. Suddenly, a little boy comes running while calling for his older brother. He's holding an instrument and says he's going to play a song to celebrate the achievement. Hans praises Jonas, saying that even musicians think he's a child prodigy. Our protagonist smiles and says that he'd really like to hear his brother's music then. Jonas gets super happy with that answer and gets ready to start playing. And just like that, the little boy starts playing his instrument with great concentration. But out of nowhere, everything gets very dark and some voices start screaming Jonas's name. Then, a guy with silver hair wakes up very startled in his own bed. He realizes it was all just a dream and that he's in a dark room. With a very sad look, he calls himself an idiot for having that dream again. The young man thinks there's no way to go back to that happy day from the past. Meanwhile, someone is climbing the stairs, heading straight for the protagonist's room. He then stops right in front of a wooden door and is about to open it to enter. A man enters the room carrying food and greets him, calling him young master. He seems to notice something a bit strange and gets a very confused look on his face. Lucas then asks if the young master had a nightmare, since he looks pale. The white-haired guy explains that he dreamed about the past from about 20 years ago. Lucas says that's a long time to be thinking about old memories and hands him the food. The servant suggests he try some fresh cheese with the meal, and he also reminds him that after eating, they'll do the sword training he skipped. Isaac remembers that 20 years ago, he caught a flu 1 month before going to the academy. The flu lasted for 3 months, and his desperate father went to find a mage from the tower. The mage then said the boy had a very unusual type of body. He explained that every living being is born with its own place to store mana, but his son's mana circulation was too violent and fast for his body. If it continued like that, his place for storing mana would eventually break. And that's exactly what happened. The mana in his body burst like a dam. When it hit the man outside, it caused a giant energy explosion. The explosion was so strong that it sent everyone nearby flying far away. A lot of people got hurt, and everyone in the mansion lived in great fear of him. Until one day, the mana finally reached his younger brother's right hand. Desperate, the boy begged his father to lock him up somewhere safe. With his eyes full of tears, he made this request to be able to protect everyone. He wanted a place where no one could get close, so they wouldn't end up getting hurt. And that's how he was locked away, so that no one else would get hurt because of him. He remembers he was about 15 years old when all of that happened, but suddenly, our protagonist starts coughing nonstop while he was eating. Worried by the noise, Lucas loses his balance near the door. The servant starts coughing and realizes that blood is coming out of his mouth nonstop. Isaac immediately realizes these are symptoms of mana poisoning, and he knows very well that it's his fault, because Lucas stayed by his side for a long time. Isaac holds him and says he needs to rest for at least a whole month. The servant asks who would take care of him, since he has no friends, and the master gets upset. But Lucas tells the young master not to worry, saying he knows how tough he is. He boasts that he's already survived dozens of explosions without a single scratch. But the silver-haired man warns that a single explosion could cost him everything he has. And then the young man tells him to leave, saying he's going to meditate and doesn't want to be disturbed. With a smile on his face, Lucas says it was a pleasure to serve his young master. The door then closes, and Isaac is alone again in his very dark room. Suddenly, he has a vision and remembers when everyone was congratulating him. In his memory, he's sitting at the dinner table, with a very serious look on his face. But the happy scene transforms into a terrible aftermath, with everyone down on the floor. Desperate, the boy sees his nanny down on the ground amidst all the chaos. A voice then welcomes Lucas, who had just arrived at that place. Looking up, the young man sees a figure floating above the completely destroyed table. This person is Lucas, who smiles in a very sinister way at young Master Isaac. Back in the present, Isaac wakes up, panting and scared from the nightmare. With his eyes wide, he remembers that Lucas had actually already passed away. He recalls that the servant left coughing up blood and didn't return for over a year. That day, another explosion happened, and the silver-haired man locked himself in his room for good. Since then, food was left at his bedroom door every day without fail. He blames himself, thinking he should have kept his distance and not gotten attached to anyone. Regretfully, he believes he should have treated everyone coldly from the beginning, and then he remembers Hans's family and how happy they seemed to be. With that, a few more years passed, with piles of bread being left at his door. Even so, he remained alive and picked up the bread that was left every day. Looking much older, he decides he needs to look to his future. Time had made him a middle-aged man, but his face was already that of an old one. For 30 years, he studied magic to overcome his unusual condition. With nothing left to learn from books, he now decides to begin his meditation. During his meditation, a mysterious voice began to speak inside his mind. The voice asks about his loneliness and advises him to truly know himself. And after many, many years, he finally found a clue to his curse. He wonders if something happened to his family while he studies the papers. On his desk, we can see various research materials and mana crystals. With a very tired look, he calculates that he must be about 71 years old now. The silver-haired man looks at the many marks on the wall that represent the years that have passed. Suddenly, footsteps are heard from the other side of the door to his room. A shadowy figure of an older man stops right in front of his wooden door. An old man with an eye patch and a face full of scars ends up calling him brother. He introduces himself as Jonas and asks if his older brother is sleeping in there. Surprised, Isaac asks how he managed to get there and what he wants. The younger brother asks with a very sad expression if he can come into the room. Isaac clenches his fist and tells him to stay where he is and talk from there. They sit down, leaning against the door, and the protagonist says it's a long story. Jonas then reveals that that day is the anniversary of their father's passing. With a very sad look, the older brother asks how their father passed away. Jonas says it's also a long story and offers to tell it if he wants. So he begins to tell the whole story, starting from 30 years in the past. He begins to narrate the war of succession between the kingdom's princes. On the other side of the door, Isaac listens attentively to his brother's story. Isaac listens attentively with his tired blue eyes to the story his brother is telling. Meanwhile, he remembers the past and what it was like when he was still young. After the long story, the older brother compliments his brother, saying he narrates well. Jonas laughs and jokes that if he had known, he would have become a traveling poet. The protagonist gets a sad look on his face when he talks about the difficulty of having only one hand. Realizing what he said, the younger brother genuinely apologizes for his comment. With his hands together, the older man prepares to say something important. Jonas then reveals that everyone in the family was very angry with him for what happened. With a somewhat shaky look, he takes a deep breath before continuing his confession. And even with all that anger, they missed their brother terribly. With eyes full of tears, the brother confesses that they all really loved him very much. He says it's a shame because he wanted to see his brother's face one last time. The older brother asks what he means by "one last time," and he explains everything. He explains that he was injured and now asks his brother to live the rest of his life in peace. With a look of pure regret, the protagonist thinks he should have acted sooner. When he gets to the door, he sees a pool of blood seeping out from under it and panics. In a panic, he opens the door very quickly to see what happened to his brother Jonas. And there he finds Jonas collapsed on the floor with a sword in him. Shocked by the scene, the older brother is speechless seeing his brother like that. He doesn't understand how Jonas managed to talk for so long with that injury. Then the protagonist picks him up, saying he can't just leave him there, and so the silver-haired man starts walking, carrying his brother. He climbs a long staircase, carrying his brother in his arms with difficulty. Tears stream down his face as he wonders why everything ended like this. He asks himself why his brother is so light and how long it's been since he ate properly. Finally, he reaches the top of the stairs, where a bright light shines from the door. He takes a deep breath of fresh air for the first time in the decades he's been locked up. The older brother takes his first step out of his prison after many years. As he steps out, he is faced with the complete destruction of his old childhood home. He walks through the rubble and passes the body of a giant wolf monster. Extending his hand to the sky, he notices that it has started to snow everywhere. He decides he will wait until spring to lay his brother to rest in the cemetery. Looking at a snow-covered tree, he says that after that, he will also rest. The scene then changes from the tree, in winter to the same tree, but in spring. A white butterfly flies towards a branch where a new leaf has just sprouted. The butterfly then lands on the hilt of a sword that was stuck in the ground. The protagonist is in front of a grave that was recently dug in the cemetery. He holds a blue mana crystal in his hand, with a very determined look. With great force, the older man squeezes the crystal in his hand, ready to use its power, and then a large amount of fire and wind energy explodes from his hand. He looks to the sky and asks his brother if he saw what he was able to do. He finally achieved total control of his mana, creating a fireball. After years of research, he overcame his condition and wonders if he can rest. With a sigh of relief, he falls to the ground, completely tired of it all. Lying next to the grave, he asks if he can be forgiven, even just a little. He blames himself, thinking that if he had acted faster, everything could have been different. He wonders if he could have changed the fate of his entire family. Lying on the grass with a smile on his face, he prepares to finally depart. But suddenly, a familiar voice asks him if he had a nightmare. He recognizes the voice as Hans's, but he knows that's impossible because he passed away. With his eyes open, he realizes he has woken up from a long and tragic nightmare. Lying in his bed, he wakes up panting and confused by everything he just dreamed. Hans notices he's covered in a cold sweat and is pale and worries about his condition. The servant gets closer, asking if he had a rather restless night. The silver-haired man wonders if this is a dream or his life flashing before his eyes. Not understanding the silence, the young man on crutches asks if the young master is okay. He then remembers the past, when Jonas was climbing a tree in the garden. With a determined look, the young boy ignores the warnings of danger and keeps climbing. From the top of the tree, the younger brother smiles excitedly at the protagonist. Jonas shows a toy soldier to his brother with a big smile. Watching from the window, the older brother observes him with a very shocked expression. The little boy celebrates excitedly for having reached the top of the tree. With a very gentle smile, the protagonist watches his happy brother from the window. Realizing the situation, the silver-haired young man understands that it's not a dream. He realizes that somehow he has managed to return to the past again. The voice from his meditation echoes in his mind, reminding him to free himself from the past. The voice advises him to let go of his thoughts and the vision of his life. He then realizes he needs to become who he was truly meant to be in the end. With new determination in his eyes, he is ready to change his destiny. Suddenly, the sound of something breaking pulls him from his thoughts. 3 maids are in the hallway cleaning up the mess caused by his condition. They comment that his temper is getting more and more sensitive because of the pain. Hans overhears the conversation and, annoyed, says he's going to teach them a lesson right now, but Isaac grabs his clothes, stopping him from going to argue with the maids. The silver-haired young man says that they're not wrong about what they said. He then asks Hans to stop coming to his room so he won't get hurt. With a very serious look, the servant stares at him without saying a single word, but he kneels in front of the young master and says he likes him all the same. He states that the young man is just going through a difficult phase and that it will pass. With a gentle smile, the boy says that when it's all over, it will be no big deal. And the protagonist remembers that Hans said all of that with a bright smile. But in the end, he ended up losing his life in one of the explosions he himself caused. He blames himself, saying that everyone who took care of him passed away because of him. Looking at his brother playing, he realizes he needs to act as soon as possible. With a new plan in mind, he calls for Hans, who is standing outside. The servant responds immediately, making himself available to his young master Isaac. The silver-haired young man looks at him and, with a cold voice, tells him to go away. With a furious look, he shouts for the servant to get out of his sight right now. With his head down, Hans says nothing, just listening to his master's order. The protagonist then says in a calmer voice that he understands the whole situation. He believes this is the right choice, as staying near him would put him in danger. The young man on crutches then turns to leave the room without another word. But before leaving, he asks the young master not to carry everything by himself like this. He advises him to rely on them sometimes, and then finally leaves the room. The silver-haired man remembers that he never said those words in his past. Suddenly, he slaps his own face to see if he isn't sleeping again. With a red face, he feels the pain and the strange sensation it causes. He wonders if this is real and what his passing in the cemetery was. Then, looking out the window at his brother, he is still very confused about everything. But he decides that it doesn't matter if it's a dream or reality, he will change the future. He is determined not to let another mana explosion happen again. The young man remembers that a long time ago, there was someone with the same condition as him. He found out about Zeke, his great-grandfather, in the records his father gave him. After years of studying the records, he discovered a way to overcome his condition. This method involved using a special item called a runestone. The stone is created by inscribing a specific design on a magic stone. He holds the crystal and thinks how difficult it was to do this before with his trembling hands. To stop the explosions, his mana vessel needs to withstand the constant circulation. But in his case, the mana flows violently, and the vessel can't handle it. Normally, a person would perish from this, but his vessel heals on its own, and that's why he can explode multiple times. A true calamity. The theory stone he's holding intentionally disrupts the mana pathways. With this, the damaged parts receive a constant impact and open new channels. This way, the shock from the raging mana is dispersed, and the explosion is prevented. However, the chance of success is low, and he only succeeded in his past life before he passed on. That small spark of fire was the proof of his success back then. He wonders if he will be able to succeed once more this time. Concentrating his mana, a large amount of fire explodes in both his hands. Surprised by the result, the boy is shocked by the power he just unleashed. He wonders what kind of fire power that is, as he's never seen anything like it. He tries to control the power, but the energy continues to flow from his body. A blue mana circle forms above him. As he tries to control the energy, the blue mana flows through his entire body, causing him to feel intense pain. With wide eyes, he feels his heart beat faster with the pressure. The runestone in his hand begins to glow very brightly with all the energy. A small flame appears in his hand, indicating that the process is working. The flame grows and turns into a fireball larger than he expected. He realizes the number of mana channels in his body has increased to 3. Now he can manifest 3 different spells at the same time if he wants. But he closes his hand and puts out the fire, as that is not his main goal right now. His main goal is to prevent any mana explosions from happening again. And for that, just 3 channels are not enough to contain all his power. He needs to use magic more often to increase the channels and reduce the strain. And until that happens, he can't keep anyone close by, so he doesn't hurt them. That night, he is determined to keep everyone at a distance from him for safety. Suddenly, Hans enters the room with dinner, saying it's time to eat. He brought the young master's favorite wheat bread, but he is told to leave immediately. With an irritated expression, the boy thinks that the servant isn't listening at all. Hans then says he will just watch him eat, and then leave the room. The silver haired boy then asks him his current age to confirm something. Upon learning he is 12, he realizes he's at an age to be quite spoiled. He then picks up the fork with the bread and brings it to his mouth to try it. The silver-haired young man remembers it's been a long time since he tasted the nanny's bread. Hans watches him eat with a gentle and satisfied smile on his own face. Isaac then realizes he hasn't seen the nanny all day and asks the servant about her. The silver-haired young man eats a bit of the stew while waiting for the answer. Hans explains that her son has pneumonia and she went home to take care of him. The young master then realizes that everything is going well, just as it did in the past. At that, the servant watches him with a serious and worried expression on his face. Meanwhile, the fireplace in the room burns the firewood, lighting up the entire space. With a thoughtful look, he prepares to put his new plan into action. He then stops eating and places his hand on the table, drawing attention. The young man asks if the nanny's son is the only one with pneumonia in the village. The servant on crutches watches him with a confused expression, not understanding the question. He explains that all the children in the village caught the illness, and the young master understands. Isaac then remembers a tragic event that happened around that same time. The mass pneumonia incident in Black Goose Village that took the nanny's son's life. She lived with a great sense of loss until her last breath because of it. He doesn't want her to go through all that suffering once again now. The silver-haired man remembers the cause of the pneumonia was something much more specific. He looks at the plate of stew and the spoon in his hand very thoughtfully. With new determination, he calls for Hans to start his new plan. The boy stands up and asks the servant what kind of monster they hunted. That night, under the moonlight, the forest was quiet and very calm. A deer was walking peacefully through the snow when something caught its attention. The animal looks to the side, very startled by the noise it just heard. Suddenly, a huge fireball flies in its direction with great speed. The deer manages to barely dodge the fireball, which explodes in the forest. Isaac appears in the forest, complaining that he missed the target by just a little bit. He thought it was a wolf, and that's why he used such a strong fire spell. With his backpack and shovel on his back, he continues on his way through the dark forest. He approaches a wooden sign that points towards the edge of the cliff. Back at the mansion, he confirms with Hans that the monster was from Black Goose Village. The servant says he didn't get a good look, but someone from the mage tower bought it. He says he took a peek and saw a hooded mage taking the monster away. He describes the monster as a giant spider covered in silver hair. From the description, the protagonist realizes it's a winter spider. They aren't strong, but they reproduce quickly and form large swarms. But the real problem is the highly concentrated mana they carry in their bodies. Exposure to this mana causes poisoning that acts like a toxin in the body. In the forest, the silver-haired young man is gathering some medicinal herbs. He is sure that the village children were poisoned by the spider's mana. He puts the herbs he collected into a bag to take them with him to the village. The problem is that back then, people barely knew about mana poisoning. He believes the amount of herbs he collected will be enough for now. If the children take the herbs, their symptoms should ease up a bit for now. But the effect is only temporary, and the only cure is to get rid of all the spiders. He thinks about asking his parents for help, but his father is at the border fortress, and his mother is traveling the continent in search of a cure for his condition. If he just waits, the nanny's son's life will be in great danger. That night, he arrives at a quiet and silent village with windmills. He goes to a simple wooden house and knocks on the door very carefully. Inside, the nanny is sitting beside the bed of her sick son. Hearing the knocking at the door, she gets up, surprised and very scared. She opens the door and is met with a hooded figure in the darkness of the night. With her eyes wide with fear, she asks who is right there at the door. The silver-haired young man takes off his hood and greets her, saying she looks tired. She recognizes him and asks what the young master is doing there at this hour. Worried, she cleans the dirt from his face and hugs him very tightly. With a determined look, he prepares to explain the reason for his visit. He explains that since she hadn't been there for days, He came to see how she was doing. Worried, she says he shouldn't come in because her son might pass on the illness. The young man then covers his face with a cloth and says it's all right now. He then hands her the bag of herbs, saying it's for her son. The nanny asks what it is, and he explains that they are herbs and how to prepare them. Isaac enters the house and goes to the room where the sick boy is lying down. He approaches the bed and observes the boy, who is sleeping with great difficulty. The silver-haired man notices the bluish spots on his face, confirming the poisoning. He tries to wake the boy by calling his name, with his mother watching from a distance. The little boy opens his eyes with difficulty and looks at young Master Isaac. In a weak voice, he asks Isaac not to fire his mother because of him. The boy blames himself, saying his mother didn't go to work because of his illness. The silver-haired man then says he won't fire the nanny and that she is very important. He places his hand on the boy's forehead and tells him to focus on getting better soon. The next day, he and a hunter are in front of an abandoned mine. They approach the entrance of the cave, which is overgrown and very dark. The young man asks if it's a limestone cave, and the hunter confirms that it is. The young master thanks him and pays him for the service of guiding him to that place. The hunter warns him to be careful, as people disappear in that area. He remembers that winter spiders prefer damp limestone caves. Before entering, he concentrates his energy in his hand to prepare himself. With mana glowing in his hands, he is ready to face the spiders. He can now cast 3 spells at once with the power of a second, class 1. But if he overuses it, his mana vessel could break again, which would be bad. And without knowing how many spiders are inside, he can't just attack blindly. So, he steps on a specific plant that will be his secret weapon in there. The plant is ice belladonna, an herb with very special properties. Normally, its fruits are used as a paralytic or even as an anesthetic, but for winter spiders, it is a lethal and very powerful poison. The sun shines in the sky as he gathers the fruits of that poisonous plant. With the fruits in a bag, he takes a deep breath, preparing for the next step. He realizes he should have brought gloves, as the plant is much more potent. With the preparations ready in the runestones he made, he is ready to enter. He enters the dark cave with a mana light in his hand to illuminate the way. The silver-haired young man walks carefully through the dark and damp cave. He approaches a descent and looks down, trying to see what's there. The protagonist thinks it would be very pathetic to perish in a place like that. He believes the spider's nest must be down there and looks for a way to descend. He finds an old rope ladder and decides to use it to go down. With a little fear, he prepares to go down the ladder, which looks fragile. He holds the rope very tightly and starts to descend to the bottom of the cave. The ladder sways with each step, but he continues down very carefully. Finally, he reaches the bottom of the cave and steps onto the dirt floor. Tired from the descent, he takes a deep breath and composes himself to continue. He looks around and realizes he has found the right place for his mission. The cave is full of animal and human skeletons scattered on the floor. The bodies are piled up like mummies, completely drained of their fluids. He picks up a bone from the ground and identifies it as a human clavicle. The silver-haired man concludes that it must be one of the missing people the hunter mentioned. Suddenly, a giant spider leg emerges from the shadows, ready to attack. The silver-haired boy is startled to see the creature coming out of the shadows. He quickly reacts and throws himself to the ground to dodge the spider's attack. With a serious expression, he prepares to counter-attack the giant monster. He then concentrates his mana in the palm of his hand, creating a small sphere of light. The sphere multiplies into several fireballs that float around him. He then launches one of the fireballs directly at the creature that attacked him. The young man realizes they are afraid of fire and uses that to keep them at a distance. He knows he needs to prepare before a swarm of spiders surrounds him, so he ties a cloth over his face to protect himself from his own trap. Next, he takes the bag full of ice belladonna fruits that he collected. Kneeling on the cave floor, he begins his plan to defeat the creatures. With his face covered, he looks forward, focused on his extermination mission. The young master then prepares to use the poisonous fruits against the monsters. He uses his fire magic to burn the fruits and release a toxic smoke. With that, the green smoke begins to spread throughout the dark cave. The creatures start to feel the effect of the poison and become disoriented. Several spiders begin to fall to the ground, paralyzed by the poisonous smoke. With a determined look, he declares that the hunt will finally begin. Suddenly, the scene changes to a bookshelf in a very fancy office. In his past life, he was in the office surrounded by piles of documents. The silver-haired man was writing angrily, wondering how things had come to this point. He then gets up and looks out the window with a very tired expression. Outside, he sees a man arguing aggressively with his subordinates. The man was shouting, questioning why the Lord had failed to protect his own people. He was asking why Black Goose Village was abandoned, and the Lord was getting irritated. Tired of the shouting, the young man moves away from the window, finding it all too noisy. He returns to his desk and thinks about asking them to board up the windows. But then he has a better idea and decides to move everything to the basement. It would be quieter there, and he could focus on researching his unusual condition. He planned to line the walls with a mineral resistant to mana explosions. With a smile, he turns and asks Hans what he thinks of his idea. However, he realizes there is no one in the room and calls for his servant again. His smile vanishes as he remembers an important detail about the servant. The Lord then recalls that at that time, Hans was no longer with him. He remembers the loneliness he felt while working day and night without stopping. His hand wouldn't stop writing as he tried to deal with the whole situation. An expression of exhaustion and sadness takes over his face as he remembers the past. He continued to write documents, trying to ignore the pain he felt inside. The memories of that lonely time haunted him constantly, without a break. The only thing that kept him busy was the endless work on his desk. But he wouldn't let the past shake him again with those memories. The young man was determined not to repeat the same mistakes of his previous life. Back in the cave, the poisonous smoke continues to spread through the area. The boy remains kneeling on the ground, waiting for the poison to take full effect. He thinks that he always remembers old things when his mind starts to wander. Seeing the fallen spiders, he confirms that the plant's poison worked very well. The smoke causes the creatures' bodies to go numb until they suffocate, but he also needed to protect himself, which is why he used a damp cloth on his face. After that, he purified the air he breathed using the mana in his own body. He also created a fireball to scan the area and find more monsters. He was using 3 spells at the same time: purification, fire, and phase shifted fire. He calls it multi-channel casting, and thanks to it, he bought time for the spiders to weaken. With a wave of his finger, he bids farewell to the paralyzed creatures on the ground. Then, a gigantic explosion of fire burns all the spiders in the cave. The silver-haired young man calmly walks away from the fire he left behind. With his face covered, he keeps his gaze focused and determined on the path ahead. He notices that the surviving spiders are all running in a single direction. The boy then deduces that there must be water in the location where they are all fleeing. Without a worry, he walks over the flames that are still burning on the cave floor. The flames continue to consume the bodies of the spiders that couldn't escape. He complains that the fire is strong and that if he doesn't hurry, he'll suffocate from the smoke. He decides it's better to finish everything quickly, and so takes off his heavy coat. The deepest part of the cave is covered in sharp, icy stalactites. The young man arrives at a large chamber with a frozen lake and a firelight in his hand. He hugs himself, feeling cold, and regrets taking off the heavy coat earlier. The temperature has dropped so much that the surface of the lake is completely frozen. He looks up and notices something strange and disgusting on the ceiling of the ice cave. The ceiling is covered with hundreds of spider eggs that glow in the firelight. He thinks that if there are so many eggs around, it can only mean one thing. Suddenly, a huge, sharp ice stalactite falls from the ceiling towards him. With a cold sweat on his face, he is shocked by what just happened there. He quickly jumps back to be able to dodge the surprise attack. With a serious expression, he turns and faces the threat that attacked him by surprise. Alone in the icy cave, he prepares to face the danger that awaits him. The boy concentrates his mana and creates a new fireball in his hand to defend himself. He launches the fireball towards the eggs, hanging from the cave's ceiling. The fireball flies towards a dark hole from which the eggs are coming. He looks up with a tense expression, waiting for the result of his attack. His expression changes to pure shock when he sees what comes out of the hole in the cave ceiling. A giant spider with ice armor emerges from the darkness and glares at him with hatred. His eyes widen in terror as he realizes the size of the monster in front of him. The queen attacks him with her ice claws, and the boy throws himself aside to dodge. He is thrown back by the shock wave from the giant spider queen's attack. Annoyed, he complains that his bad feelings are unfortunately never wrong. He then identifies the monster as the fearsome winter spider queen now. Unlike the others, she has resistance to fire and emits an aura of intense cold. The queen attacks again with her legs, which are as sharp as sharpened ice blades. He dodges the attack and prepares another fireball to counter-attack. The fireball hits the queen, but doesn't cause much damage because of her armor. He realizes that a few fireballs won't be enough to defeat her like the others. The only good news is that the queen doesn't move very fast because of her size. With a pained expression, he feels his body already reaching its limit of exhaustion. He is in the body of a 12-year-old child and has been using magic all day, which has drained him. The giant spider queen slowly approaches him, ready for the final attack. Even though he's tired, he gives a small smirk as if he has a plan in mind. He then remembers something important that might help him in this difficult situation. He remembers the wheat bread that Hans gave him and how delicious it was. In that cold region, eating soft wheat bread was all thanks to his dear nanny. For the spoiled boy, she traveled every week to buy good quality wheat. A smile forms on his face as he remembers the affection of his dear nanny. The young man decides that when he gets back, he will ask her to make many loaves for him. With the shovel in his hand and a fireball floating beside him, he now prepares himself. He says it doesn't matter if she's a queen, because in the end, she's just a spider. The young man then hurls his heavy bag directly at the giant creature. The bag collides with the queen's ice armor with a strong impact. With that, the creature's armor begins to crack from the force of the blow. The queen's ice armor shatters, revealing a vulnerable part of her body. Without wasting time, the boy charges forward with the shovel in hand to attack the weak spot. With a determined look, he prepares to land the blow with all his strength. He then hits the cracked part of the armor with the tip of his sharp shovel. The blow hits the monster's exposed flesh squarely, making it scream in pain. The silver-haired boy jumps onto the queen's back, preparing for the next attack. He raises the shovel high, ready to deliver the final blow to the creature's head. But the queen thrashes violently and throws him off her back. The boy manages to grab onto one of the creature's ice legs at the last second. The queen tries to hit him with another of her sharp legs to knock him off. He holds on tightly, determined not to let go and to continue with his plan. The young man knows he doesn't have the precision to hit the creature with fireballs, so he gives up on attacking from a distance and prepares a different kind of magic. He creates a fireball and compresses it with all his strength in the palm of his hand. With one last effort, he compresses it once more, turning it into a blue sphere. With a furious expression, he prepares to use his new and powerful magic. He then shoves the blue energy sphere into the queen's open wound with force. The queen's body begins to glow intensely with the blue energy from within. With a sweaty face, he watches the result of his attack with anticipation and exhaustion. The creature's armor begins to shatter from the energy growing inside it. The queen screams in agony as the blue energy explodes from within her body. The explosion completely shatters the spider queen's body all at once. He tries to pull his arm, which is stuck in the monster's body, but he can't. With great effort, he finally manages to free his arm from the creature. He then falls backward, exhausted and without strength after the intense battle. The boy hits his head on the ground and faints as the queen explodes into pieces. Lying on the cold cave floor, he loses consciousness due to the impact. In the place where the queen was defeated, a bright blue crystal appears in the air. The queen's mana crystal floats in the air, enveloped in an aura of blue energy. He wakes up confused and wonders where he is, as he hears familiar voices. He recognizes the voices of the nanny and Hans, who is being scolded by her. She asks Hans if he really didn't know that the young master went to the mine. The nanny is worried, and Hans explains that a hunter guided him, but then disappeared. The young man remembers fainting and waking up alone at the cave entrance. After that, he went to the village and found Hans pacing back and forth. Upon seeing his servant, he felt relieved and fainted from exhaustion in his arms. In bed, he hears Hans say that the scars on the nanny's son have completely vanished. Hans smiles and says that despite everything, the young master still has a good heart. Lying in bed, the boy feels embarrassed hearing his servant's compliments. He then sits up in bed and calls for Hans, surprising everyone in the room. He asks how long he slept, and Hans says it was for half a day. The nanny gets irritated and says he can't just say everything is fine. She scolds him for going to such a dangerous place, and he makes up an excuse. The silver-haired boy asks about her son, and the nanny says he is much better. With a smile, he feels relieved and decides to keep the secret of the poison to himself. He thinks that if his superiors find out, they will send scholars, and that will be a problem. The nanny asks how he knew about the herbs, and the boy says he read about them in a book. The young master then tells Hans it's time to go back, and the servant notices the snow outside. Hans worries because if they find out he left the property, things will get bad. The nanny then hands him a basket of apples as a thank you for his help. She explains that the apples are a thank you gift from all the villagers. With a bandage on his face, he holds one of the apples, thinking about what to do. He then tells the nanny to take another week off to care for her son. She worries about what the head butler will think and becomes anxious. The silver-haired young man that asks, who said she was only taking a week off. With a smile, he holds up an apple and asks her to make jam with the fruits. He confirms that he wants apple jam and for her to bring wheat bread when she returns. The woman is surprised and moved by the silver-haired young master's request. With a gentle smile on her face, she is happy with the kind boy's attitude. With a mischievous smile, he then suggests she make an apple pie too. The silver-haired boy thinks it's a great idea, and night falls over the quiet and silent village. The sun shines brightly in the sky, announcing a new day at the young man's estate. We see the boy running through the castle courtyard with great determination on his face. Tired, he stops for a moment to catch his breath, but soon continues running. A week passes, and the young man continues his daily running training without stopping. During this time, he notices that his body is undergoing major changes. His previous 3 mana channels have increased, and now he has a total of 4. His body is more stable, and he can now cast 4 spells at once. He believes that pushing himself in the fight and running every day helped him improve. Magic requires mental strength, and physical strength is linked to the strength of the mind. The reason he reached his limit in the mine was his untrained child's body. He remembers that in his past life, he was trained by a man named Lucas. Lucas was responsible for training his endurance and physical strength back then. With new determination, he prepares to continue his intense training. Suddenly, a voice calls him young master, interrupting his daily training. 2 men in suits approach, saying it's the day for his regular check-up. He recognizes one of them as the head butler, Schiller, and is surprised by the visit. The other man greets him and asks how he is feeling that day. He explains that this is his personal doctor, but he never understood his condition. The doctor examines him and says he sees no problems, and that he looks healthier. Then the doctor says it's time to change his medicine, and the boy is suspicious of the decision. The doctor opens his leather briefcase to get the new medicine for the young man. Inside the briefcase are several potions called panacea, which stabilize mana. The silver-haired boy picks up a vial and thinks that his father always gave him the very best. Panacea means cure-all and is used as a tonic for tired soldiers. But the translation from the ancient language was misinterpreted, and the effect is different. Its real effect is to increase mana flow, which is actually a poison for him. But now, the potion is the perfect trigger to increase his mana channels. With the check-up finished, the doctor starts to walk away across the castle courtyard, but the head butler stops and stares at him, making the boy confused by his attitude. The head butler comments that the young master is much calmer than usual. He remembers that before, the boy always had tantrums during his check-ups. The young man smiles and asks if he should have had a tantrum this time too. The head butler watches him with a suspicious look without saying a single word. The head butler then reveals that he knows the young master cured the village children. The young man is surprised, and the butler says that Hans told him everything about the incident. He warns him that if the advisory council finds out, they won't stay quiet. With a serious expression, the butler says he will ignore what happened just this once, but he asks the young master to restrain himself and not repeat this in the future. Even in the past, he remembers that the head butler was always a strict man. The silver-haired young man was never able to get close to him because of his demeanor. Schiller was a cold man who kept everyone at a distance and showed no emotion. And yet, he takes the doctor's briefcase and hands it to the young master carefully. The butler tells the young man to consult him if he can't restrain himself in the future. He remembers that Jonas told him Schiller had been serving the family since his grandfather's time, and even after the fall of the Gothas, he remained at his post until the end of his life. With a smile, the young master realizes the butler is more thoughtful than he appears. With a neutral look, the head butler observes the silver-haired young man before him. He then asks why the boy has been running every day lately. With a determined look, he prepares to explain the reason for his training. He explains that all powerful mages in history also trained their bodies. The head butler watches him attentively as he continues to talk about magic. Elsewhere, Schiller is writing a letter to report on the latest events. He reports that the young master cured the village children and that the check-up was completed. He believes the boy's future as a scholar or alchemist is promising. He thinks this will bring some peace of mind to the lord of the house. The head butler then asks a maid to come into his office to talk. A red-haired maid enters with a worried expression and asks to be excused. Schiller recognizes her as Rosa and asks the reason for her unexpected visit. Rosa explains that the maids keep disappearing and not returning to the castle. Schiller comments that he already knows about Clara and Annette's disappearances, but isn't worried. With tears in her eyes, Rosa says she is sure something happened to them. She believes her friends wouldn't disappear without saying anything to anyone else. Rosa wonders if it isn't strange that so many maids are suddenly disappearing. Elsewhere, two maids are talking about the recent disappearances. One of them comments that the climate and the monsters make the place dangerous to live in. The other maid says Annette wouldn't disappear because she was working to pay for her father's medicine. A servant named Bill scoffs and says she might have gotten tired of taking care of her father. He suggests she ran off with some guy she fell in love with, and the maids get annoyed. Bill says he's just kidding, but that he has his own theory about the disappearances. With a malicious smile, he approaches them and prepares to tell them his theory. He whispers that it's all the work of dark magic and shows a skull in a circle. He explains that since it's a family of mages, they might be using dark magic, and since the young master is sick, he suggests the Lord would do anything to save him. The maids are shocked and wonder if the girls were offered as sacrifices. Bill smiles and teases them, saying he might be right about his crazy theory. Rosa scolds him and says the Lord wouldn't do that, as he even took in a criminal. Bill gets annoyed with Rosa's comment and calls her a cheeky and insolent brat. Suddenly, a mysterious voice catches Bill's attention, saying it's an interesting story. Isaac appears with a smile and asks Bill to tell him more about his theory. Startled, Bill begins to explain that the disappearances started 2 months ago. With a serious look, he continues to report the details of the disappearances. He says that the first to disappear was the maid Hild, without a trace. After a few weeks, Clara also vanished, and now it was in its turn. In the office, the boy is sitting at his desk, facing the servant Bill. With a serious look, the young master asks if he has any idea why. Bill scoffs at the boy and says he doesn't know anything, but Isaac is unfazed. The silver Haired boy encourages him to be honest and promises not to punish him for it. Bill remains silent for a moment, thinking about whether or not to believe the young master. The young man then asks if it's because of him, and Bill confirms that it's pretty obvious. He cites the example of Hans, who is always hurt from serving the young master. Bill says that Hans is always saying he won't have a peaceful passing because of this. He then realizes he's gotten himself into trouble and that he shouldn't have said that. The young master then calls Bill by name with a serious and intimidating voice. Desperate, Bill begs for his life and asks the young master to spare him. Isaac asks if he doesn't want to perish, and Bill desperately confirms that he doesn't. With a smile, the young man says that in exchange, he'll have to do something for him now. Bill agrees to the proposal with a look of relief and fear on his face. Night falls, and the moon shines in the sky, illuminating the darkness of the large castle. Sitting on his bed, the silver-haired young man uses his blue flame magic. He concentrates and begins to call out the names of the missing maids. The images of Rosa and Annette appear amidst the blue flames surrounding him. With the blue flame in his hand, he prepares to begin his investigation. With a snap of his fingers, he is ready to find out what happened to them. He remembers the maids' names and prepares to use his own magic. He recalls that Rosa and Annette were the only ones to serve him after Hans passed away. In his past life, they volunteered to take care of him despite his bad reputation. He remembers having a tantrum and breaking a potion vial on the floor. The drops of the purple liquid mixed with the blood that was dripping from his hand. He yelled at the maids to leave and let him be alone in his dark room. With expressions of sadness and fear, the maids left the room without a word. He remembers yelling at them not to bring that useless potion anymore. One of the maids tried to encourage him, saying he shouldn't lose hope. With his face covered by shadows, he wondered what hope was to him. Standing against a red background, he questioned what they would know about his suffering. He remembered the pain of having taken someone's life with his own hands. He confessed to them that he took his own friend's life with his own hands. The brown-haired maid looked at him with an expression of shock and pity. Confused, he wondered why they were still there after his confession. The red-haired maid remembered Annette and what she had said back then. Annette regretted not having looked back or reached out her hand to Clara. The silver-haired young man observed the scene with a surprised expression. Annette explained that everyone ends up doing something they never wanted to do in life. With a serious look, he realizes that he was not alone in his suffering and pain. He remembers Annette's kind eyes, which looked at him with understanding and empathy. Annette's dark confession ended up comforting him in a strange and unexpected way. He regrets not having asked more about her story back then. With new determination, he gets up from the bed, ready to act and change the future. Bill knocks on the young master's door and announces his arrival. Isaac asks if there is any news about the whereabouts of the missing maids. Bill explains that he asked the beggars, and the descriptions matched perfectly. The young master then asks what the answer to the mystery of the disappearances is. Bill reveals that the maids were taken by slave traders from the region. The young man is confused and asks why they would need a middleman to go south. Bill explains that they need transportation and protection from bandits on the way south. With that, the young master agrees that his story makes sense when explained that way. In his thoughts, the servant scoffs, thinking that a child doesn't understand how the world works. However, he suddenly seems to realize something, and a spark of an idea appears in his mind. Bill then hands something to the boy, who is sitting calmly on his bed. With a smile, he says it was expensive to make the beggars talk, and that he spent all the money. The young man is surprised and asks if he spent the 20 silver coins he gave him. Then Bill just laughs and comments that people are very suspicious. But Isaac stares at him seriously. He pretends to be moved by the boy's generosity, who says that money doesn't matter. Isaac then asks if he has anything else to do, and the servant confirms that he does. With a smile, the young master offers him another job and promises a good reward. Bill accepts immediately, thinking he has completely fooled the boy and is happy. He believes he can make a lot of money from the young master, who is like a golden goose, thinking about the risks and rewards. Bill offers to take the young man to the middleman. The servant is radiant, believing that life is about taking risks for great returns. But suddenly, the scene changes, and Bill is shirtless inside a dark and cold cell. Next to him, there is a skeleton in a corner, showing that the place is dangerous. Desperate, he grabs the bars and shouts, wondering how he ended up in this situation. He then looks out of the cell and sees the young master standing on the other side, watching. Isaac holds a blue mana stone with a subtle smile as his eyes glow. The dungeon is dark and damp, with a sewer channel running through the middle of the hallway. With trembling hands, the servant continues to hold the iron bars of his prison. In a panic, he can't understand how his perfect plan went so wrong so suddenly. He remembers smuggling the young master out of the mansion without any problems. Tracking the middleman who took the maids was also surprisingly easy. However, something unexpected happened when they found the man they were looking for. The young master was wearing fine clothes and an elegant cape that drew a lot of attention. His noble and delicate appearance made him look like an easy target for any criminal. The middleman smiled maliciously, thinking he was a valuable commodity. Back in the present, Bill shouts indignantly why he is the one locked in that cell. He complains that the traffickers didn't lay a finger on the silver-haired young master. Meanwhile, they took everything from him except his underwear, and Isaac just watches the mana in the stone. Bill turns to the young man and furiously asks what their plan is now. He demands that the boy stop playing with the stone and say something, but he just sighs. Isaac notes that he has stopped using formal titles, and Bill says they are about to perish. The young master then reveals his plan to get Annette and the other maids out of there. Sarcastically, the servant asks how he intends to break the solid iron bars. Isaac then points his finger forward with a serious and focused look on his face. Bill is confused and surprised by the young master's sudden action in front of him. To his amazement, the iron bars of the cell bend and break, allowing passage. With his mouth open, the servant can't believe what he just witnessed. He stammers the young master's name as the boy looks back indifferently. With a fake smile, Bill asks if he isn't going to leave him behind in that dungeon. At that moment, two guards hear a noise and decide to investigate what is happening. Isaac says he's leaving, and Bill panics, asking him to wait a second. The silver-haired young man ignores his pleas and starts to walk away without looking back. In an act of desperation, the servant throws himself to his knees on the cold dungeon floor. He begs the young master to save him and promises to do anything in return. The boy stops walking and seems to consider the desperate servant's proposal. With a neutral expression, he listens to the man begging for his life there on the floor. With a cold look, the young man calls Bill by name and prepares to speak to him. He remembers having seen the servant behave in this same way before. In a memory of the past, Bill was begging for his life to be spared again. He says he wasn't in his right mind and regrets his bad actions. The Lord reveals that Bill used to be a bandit and survived by betraying his group. But this time, the Lord says he has betrayed the house of Goeth and shows his great sword. With tears in his eyes, the traitor realizes he will not be forgiven for his crimes. He begs for forgiveness, but the butler says that's enough from him. Stiller scolds him for trying to sell the secret grimoires of the Goethe family. The traitor tries to promise that he would never betray them again, but it's too late for him. Back in the present, Isaac thinks that he would be useful if he weren't so greedy. He clearly remembers that day and how the servant understood the underworld. With a serious look, the young master realizes that his story was a lie. He recalls that the criminal syndicate tried to buy his grimoires in the past. The criminal group that kidnapped the maids is now spreading throughout the territory. The silver-haired young man knows he needs to remove this threat as quickly as possible. With a scroll in hand, Isaac reminds Bill that he promised to do anything. He then says he needs the servant to do something for him first to prove it. Elsewhere, in a dark dungeon, a lantern illuminates the stone corridor. In a room, some men wait while one of them sits at a table to eat. One of his subordinates comments that his father is not eating again today. The man then brings a piece of meat to his mouth with a disgusted expression. His subordinates worry and ask him to eat a little so he doesn't get too thin. Angrily, the boss asks if she is in there and glares at a dark corner of the room. He asks her to hold on a little longer, as they will see each other again soon with dark magic. The boss then sighs in frustration for not receiving any response from her. A skull on a wooden stake turns to him and asks if her soul has weakened. One of the subordinates asks where his bathwater is, and the other answers nervously. Suddenly, he is thrown backward with a scream of pain and surprise on his face. With a swift move, the boss grabs one of his men by the neck and lifts him up. With a furious look, he glares at the man who is struggling in his strong hands. The boss asks if that man is enough to prepare his bathwater. The terrified subordinate agrees and says he will prepare everything immediately. The other men watch the scene in silence as their companion is discarded. One of them complains about the dark magic that is affecting their own boss's mood. They comment that they have tried everything, but the magic continues to have its effect. One of the men suggests using the merchandise they were going to sell, but the other scolds him. Suddenly, one of the subordinates feels something strange and stops talking abruptly. His companions look at him with curiosity, and he looks down the dark corridor. The stone corridor is silent and gloomy, with only a few lit torches. The two men look at each other with an expression of worry and fear on their faces. They feel that something is wrong and are on high alert for any danger. Suddenly, a noise echoes through the corridor, and they wonder what it was. With wide eyes, they prepare for the worst that is to come. One of the men calls for the boss, Nears, but gets no response from him. He then looks at the floor and sees his boss's body lying on the ground. Nears' eyes are open and lifeless, with an expression of shock and terror. The two men are shocked and terrified by the scene they see before them. One of them tries to call for the boss, but he doesn't move, and panic sets in. A mysterious voice catches their attention, and a shadow slowly approaches. A man holding a knife asks if they would mind bringing him some water. One of the subordinates looks at him in fear and stammers, unable to finish his sentence. With a sinister smile and a stained face, the man wipes the sweat from his forehead. He walks towards the men with the knife in hand, looking confident and threatening. With a look of contempt, he demands that the guys bring him water immediately. Back in the dungeon, the young master says that Bill will have to do something else first. With a smile, he explains that it is a contract between the two men. The contract states that Bill must obey Isaac without question and not reveal anything. The last clause says that the punishment for breaking the contract is perishing, and Bill gets scared. The boy reveals that he will have to sign with his blood to activate the contract's magic. Bill shouts and asks who is there, but Isaac tells him not to worry about it. The young man says they don't have much time and that they need to hurry with the contract. With a fearful expression, the servant questions if he really wants to stay alive. After a moment of hesitation, Bill starts walking towards the young master. He places his finger on the scroll, preparing to sign the magic contract. Someone's footsteps approach, and they prepare for the guard's arrival. With a sweaty face and closed eyes, the servant prepares to do his part. The silver-haired young man throws the knife to Bill, who catches it deftly in the air. He cuts his finger with the knife, and blood begins to drip down the sharp blade. With his bleeding finger, he presses the tip onto the scroll to seal the deal. An intense blue light emanates from the contract and envelopes them both in a magic circle. With a satisfied smile, the young master watches the magic activate before them. The guards arrive and shout, asking who they are and how they got out of their cells. The young man warns that they are coming, and Bill prepares for the fight that is about to begin. With a swift move, the young master knocks out all three guards at the same time. The men's bodies fall to the ground as the dust settles around them. Bill asks if they are done for, but Isaac explains that they are just unconscious. Surprised, the servant wonders how the boy managed to do that so easily. Isaac holds an ice crystal in his hand, and the magical energy flows through his fingers. With a calm expression, he reveals that he used magic to defeat all the guards. In a sewer tunnel, The two walk along a wooden walkway over the water. They walk in silence as the light from the torches illuminates the path ahead. Bill comments that it's the first time he's seen ice magic and praises the boy's skill. He then says that ice magic doesn't seem very practical, and the young man agrees. The young master explains that it only seems that way on the surface, and that there is more to it. With a thoughtful look, Bill continues to watch the boy with admiration and curiosity. He remembers the bandits and the danger they pose to everyone around. Isaac then asks Bill what is needed to create ice, and he is confused. He encourages the servant to guess, and Bill answers that you need water for that. The boy confirms his answer and explains that you need to shape the water first. He demonstrates the process by creating a sphere of water that spins in his hands now. The young man explains that performing all the steps at the same time is not easy to do. Bill gets startled upon hearing a noise and realizes they might be found. The bandits shout asking who they are, and Isaac prepares to attack. With a determined look, he points at the enemies and prepares to use his magic. A large mass of ice forms in the air and launches itself towards the bandits. One of the men looks up with an expression of terror and surprise on his face. Isaac reveals that he used a phase, change magic to create the ice instantly. He explains that it's not very convenient for close combat and smiles at Bill. The silver-haired young man says he wouldn't use ice if it weren't for that crystal. It's an Iceman stone that he took from the body of the Winter Spider Queen. He explains that they have academic value and are sold for a good high price. Bill asks why he worries about that, and Isaac says that almost no one understands. The injuries are mistaken for blunt force trauma, and the ice leaves no trace. With a confident smile, the young man explains that this makes the magic ideal for being discreet. Bill is surprised and a little scared by the young master's intelligence and coldness. He asks why not just eliminate them, and the young man says others would take their places. Isaac reveals that he is leaving them alive on purpose and drives him away. He attacks the two remaining bandits and knocks them out with the same ease as before. With a cold look, the young master says he only intends to eliminate one person there. His footsteps echo through the stone corridor as he approaches his target. Bill watches with astonishment and fear the determination of the boy who walks without hesitation. An imposing figure emerges from the end of the corridor and glares at the two intruders. The muscular man looks at them with contempt and asks who the two of them are. Bill stammers Nier's name and is terrified by the presence of the bandit chief. He warns that Niers is a madman who tears people apart with his bare hands. Isaac smiles and says that saves him the trouble of having to look for him later. A sphere of blue energy forms in his hand, and he prepares for battle. With a gesture, he launches a sharp ice shard towards the bandit chief. The ice blade flies at high speed and quickly approaches its target. Niers manages to dodge the attack at the last second, and the ice just grazes him. With a swift move, he bats away the ice shard with his bare hands. Bill is shocked by the man's strength, and Isaac realizes he is from a northern tribe. Bill panics and says it's no time to be impressed by the enemy. Niers calls out to the two of them and prepares to attack with his own hands. He says the young man is the merchandise he needed for his bathwater. The bandit chief says the boy will be a good ingredient for his dark magic. Bill begs him not to eliminate him, but Niers advances towards him without hesitation. With his eyes glowing red, Niers prepares to attack the defenseless servant. Bill screams that he is just an ordinary human and tries to protect himself from the imminent attack. Niers' hand quickly approaches the servant's face, who cowers in fear. He closes his eyes, expecting the final blow, but something unexpected happens. An ice blade pierces through Niers' chest from behind, paralyzing him in place. Bill realizes it's the same spell the bandit chief blocked before. With a flick of his hand, the young master controls the ice blade with precision. Niers spits and looks down, seeing the ice blade embedded in his chest. Isaac calls for Bill, and the servant turns to him with an expression of shock and relief. The silver-haired young man says that from now on, Bill is the leader of this place. He asks if the servant understood what he needs to do. and looks at him seriously, with an expression of panic and confusion. Bill doesn't know how to react to that order. He holds the knife with trembling hands and looks at the fallen bandit chief. But in the end, Isaac starts running in another direction very quickly. The young master turns and starts to walk away, leaving the servant behind for good. With his eyes closed, he remembers the words he heard in his past life. He recalls a maid telling him that everyone ends up doing something they didn't want to. She explained that these actions would follow them forever, staining their lives. The maid held his bloodied hand and offered him some comfort. She said there were only 2 paths left for him from that moment of pain. The brown-haired maid looked at him with compassion and empathy in her eyes. With a sad look, the boy remembers the pain and suffering he felt that day. It was Annette who told him those words when she was devastated by the loss of her friend. He thinks that he doesn't need to hear the same advice twice as he watches Bill from a distance. A carriage moves quickly along a dirt road towards its destination. Inside the carriage, Annette and Clara are sitting together with expressions of relief. With a determined look, the young man prepares to change the destiny of everyone around him. He decides that in this life, Annette will not lose her friend and will watch over them closely. In a memory, a maid comments that the nobles of the South look for women from other regions. Another maid explains that the women of the South are plain, which is why they seek beauty. Clara gets excited at the idea and says, maybe she should try her luck in the South too. She says there is someone who can take them to the South if they pay a certain amount. Clara then invites Heald and Annette to go with her on her new journey to the South. Annette declines the invitation, saying she still needs to take care of her sick father. She says she never heard from Heald and Clara again after they left. The young master concludes that Bill's theory about the disappearances was correct. With a serious expression, Annette continues to recount the events that followed. She says that when she found Heald and Clara in the sewers, they were not themselves. Isaac understands the situation and realizes that the maids were victims of something terrible. He remembers that sewers are dangerous places where people are sold. Annette reveals that she could have escaped at any time, but chose to stay there. She explains that the door of the cell they kept her in was broken, and she could have left. She looked out of the cell and saw Clara in a state of desperation and great fear. With tears in her eyes, the maid remembers hearing her friend's sobs. Clara was huddled in a corner, with her hair covering her face in despair. Annette realizes that if she had stayed there for a few more days, she would have left her friend. With remorse, she touches the bars of the cell, thinking about the fate that almost separated her from her. The silver-haired young man watches her with an expression of understanding and empathy. With a guilty expression, Annette confesses that she almost took her own friend's life. Isaac thanks her for telling him everything and comforts her with kind words. Annette then says there is something that has been weighing on her mind, and the young master asks what it is. She remembers that when the bandits sent them back to the mansion, she and Clara were happy, but Hill did not share the same happiness and seemed terrified at the idea. She wondered if Hild was afraid of being punished, but her fear seemed much greater. The silver-haired young man says he understands, and that he will investigate the matter. With a grateful expression, Annette bows before him and thanks him for his help. She remembers that Rosa said the bandits suddenly let them go for no reason. Isa comments that it seems ridiculous, but that Rosa has good instincts for things. Annette smiles and says that makes sense, and that the young master is the only one who cares. The young man watches her in silence as she talks about her gratitude and trust. With a serious look, he realizes that she is more intelligent than she seems at first glance. He calls her by name, and she looks at him with an expression of surprise and curiosity. The young master thanks her for her words and praises her for her insight and courage. He then says he has something else to tell her, but decides to leave it for later. After the conversation, Annette leaves the office, and the young man watches her go in silence. With a subtle smile, he realizes that she has an unexpected and promising talent. He thinks that perhaps it would be worthwhile to teach her magic one day in the near future. Outside the castle, Life goes on as usual with the sun shining in the sky. Two maids are talking about the return of the others who had disappeared. They comment that the young master welcomed them back despite the butler's opposition. One of them suggests that he might be interested in them because of his age. A servant walks past them carrying some packages and enters a side door. A servant approaches a pile of packages and arranges them very carefully. He organizes them into two piles before turning to the person watching him. A muscular man asks if his boss is there and looks at the servant seriously. With a wave of his hand, the servant greets him and prepares to answer the question. The servant scolds him for calling him boss and introduces himself as the new leader of the group. Isaac explains that there will always be vagrants in the sewers and that a new group will emerge. He asks if it's better to keep them under his control and manage them to avoid problems. Bill realizes that this was the young master's plan from the beginning and panics. He sits on one of the packages with an expression of despair and fear on his face. Bill asks if Nears used them as spies, and the man confirms it with a nod. With a smile, he comments that Nears was not just some random psychopath, and that he underestimated him. The man then reveals that the former boss always prepared an offering for someone. Bill is confused and asks what kind of offering it was and for whom it was intended. He explains that at this time of year, Nears prepared something special for the night. The servant is shocked to learn that the knights were providing cover for the group. A few days later, the silver-haired young man is in his room, getting ready. With a flame in his hand, he concentrates and prepares to train his skills. He launches a fireball towards a wall, but it dissipates in the air. With his eyes glowing, he reveals that the fire was just a distraction for the real attack. Ice crystals follow the fireball and crash into the wall with force. The combined attack of fire and ice hits the wall with a very powerful impact. With his fist clenched, he prepares for the next step of his intense training. The wall shatters from the impact of the magical attack, and he observes the result. He stops suddenly and looks at the mirror, which reflects a very intense blue light. After eliminating Nears, his mana channels increased from 4 to 5 in total. He thinks he needs to practice, using multiple types of magic at the same time. The boy knows he was lucky with Nears, and that he can't count on that again. With a determined look, he prepares to face the challenges to come. He knows he was the one who took Nears' life, and that he needs to be stronger now. He lies down on the bed and remembers the stories Jonas told him before he left. He recalls that the enemies of the House of Goa were adapted to fight against mages. With his eyes closed, he knows he can't count on the luck he had before. He decides he needs to become stronger to protect the House of Goa and his loved ones. Suddenly, a voice calls him, and he opens his eyes, surprised by the interruption. A maid and a servant enter his room with a basin of water and towels. The older woman asks Hans to bring the young master's clothes, and he obeys. The young man asks what is happening, and the woman answers with a question. With a smile, she announces that his lord has returned to the castle after his long absence. She begins to clean the boy's face with a damp towel, and he is surprised. He looks down at his shirt and realizes he is wearing elegant and well-cared-for clothes. A man on horseback approaches the castle with a serious expression on his face. With a sword at his waist, he prepares to enter the castle and find his son. On a wall, tally marks show the passing of days during his long absence. He sits at a table and prepares to write a letter to his own son. With a quill in hand, he begins to write with care and attention to detail. The Lord enters a room and calls his son's name in a very calm voice. With a tired look, he observes the room in silence, looking for his son. He sees his son lying in bed and calls his name in a very soft voice. The Lord approaches the bed and observes his son, who seems to be sleeping now. With a sigh, he sits on the edge of the bed and watches him in silence for a moment. In a dark cell, we see a guy cutting an older gentleman's hair with care. The scissors cut the white hair, and the servant says he will do what the elderly man wishes. Showing the sword at his waist, the henchman guarantees that everything can end without any pain. The gray-haired prisoner maintains a calm face and just listens to the proposal in silence. Finishing the haircut, The gentleman continues to sit there, waiting for his fate with his eyes closed. Looking at a table full of books, the jailer asks if that was what he wanted. With confirmation, the man hugs the elderly man's head, saying it would be the last time they would see each other. In this moment of farewell, we notice a heavy and sad atmosphere between the two friends. Then, the man opens the heavy wooden door and says he will go ahead to wait for him. The prisoner stands up, hearing his friend ask him not to leave any regrets behind. Changing scenes, we see a fancy and well-lit office full of bookshelves. The silver-haired young master thinks that this is the first time he's seen him face to face since that day. The lord of the house sits at his huge desk, reading some papers, while the boy calls him father. With a serious look, the gray-haired man comments that he heard his son took care of the village children. The father asks if this was true, and the young man asks back if it was Schiller who told him. The lord confirms, thinking he had misheard, but the young man quickly justifies himself, saying he was lucky. He explains that he found a book about a rare disease, and the symptoms matched the children's. Hearing this answer, the older man begins to tap his fingers on the wooden table calmly. The father changes the subject, asking about his son's health, and the boy replies that he hasn't caused any more explosions. The man praises the doctor they brought, and the protagonist agrees, pretending the treatment helped. The sun shines brightly through the large stained glass windows of the castle, illuminating the entire room. The atmosphere in the room remains calm, and the two sit in a brief moment of silence. Breaking the ice, the lord asks how things are and waits for the answer with curiosity. The boy is surprised, wanting to know if he was referring to the winter border fortress. The father questions this sudden interest, and the young man replies that one day he will have to go there. The older man reports that everything remains the same, with knights fighting monsters in heavy snow. Thinking for a moment, he says that the only difference this time was that they stopped in the city of Bern. The protagonist immediately remembers that this is the city with the sewer where supplies are purchased. The lord mentions that a very problematic incident happened there, leaving the boy curious. The man explains that a recruit attacked a commander, and the young man deduces that the attacker was eliminated. Denying this, the father reveals that the injured commander requested a military tribunal to be opened. The boy finds this attitude strange, but at that exact moment, the large office door is opened. Someone apologizes for the interruption and soon notices that the silver-haired hair is present. Two knights enter the room, and one of them smiles, saying it's an honor to see young Master Isaac again. The boy observes them with great attention, trying to understand the reason for their unexpected visit. The other soldier has a bandage on his head and makes a polite bow with his hand on his chest. The lord tells them both to enter and informs his son that he may now leave the office. Obeying the order, the teenager walks towards the hallway, passing through the heavy doors. Once outside, he hears his father ordering the military tribunal to be convened at once. Through the crack in the door, the protagonist spies on the conversation and notices one of the soldiers demanding maximum punishment. The father asks if the other knight, named Randolph, agrees with this extreme decision. The injured man remains calm and simply says he will follow any order given by his commander. The older man lets out a sigh, thinking it's crazy for him to say that after being so badly hurt. With that, the hare continues walking down the long red carpet of the hallway with firm steps. He connects the dots and understands the whole situation as he walks, lost in his thoughts. The young man knows very well that those two men are trained knights from the border fortress. Therefore, the injured soldier can only be the main victim of the previously reported attack. Suddenly, a butler approaches, running and calling for the young master, quite out of breath. The staff member is desperate, saying he looked for him everywhere and asks him to follow. With a sweaty face and a look of pure panic, the man says the matter is of extreme urgency. Outside the castle, we see the young master and the butler talking in the cold stone courtyard. The boy asks what's wrong, while the staff member looks around apprehensively. The man reports having heard about the sewer scheme, and the hare confirms, asking for more details. Apparently, There were people receiving bribes to turn a blind eye to all the crimes in the area. The protagonist asks who these corrupt individuals were, and the employee hesitates a bit before answering. With a terrified look, the servant breaks into a cold sweat, trying to gather the courage to reveal the truth. He then says that the knights were involved, leaving the young master completely shocked. Continuing his report, the staff member says that the body of one of the old henchmen was found on the street. The butler explains that the victim suffered severe attacks, and only his little finger was left intact. The hearer wants to know what that means, while his ally puts his hand inside his own pocket, pulling out a small, dark object. The servant says he found that part on that very morning. Recalling the terror, he describes waking up and seeing that macabre warning left on his bed. In addition, the knights sent a henchman to deliver a threatening message directly to him. The message demanded that all the bribe money be delivered within a maximum of just 2 days. Trembling with fear, the employee states that he will be the next victim if he doesn't comply with the deal. In total desperation, he begs for help, claiming that the young man was the one who put him in this situation. The silver-haired boy listens to all the shouting, maintaining a neutral face, and thinking coldly about the case. Questioning about the victim, the boy wants to know if there were any witnesses to the moment of the attack. The butler reports that they only saw a very fast flash of a sword before it was all over. Reflecting for a moment, the man mentions that the attacker was wearing healing bandages wrapped around his head. Hearing this detail, the teenager's gaze changes instantly, recognizing the description well. The heir simply says he understood everything, leaving the staff member indignant with such a dry response. Turning his back, the young master begins to walk calmly again and asks his ally not to worry. In a comforting tone, the protagonist guarantees that his subordinate will not lose his life. At this, the boy pieces it together, remembering that his father brought the warriors and passed through the city of Bern. It was clear that these soldiers had made a stop at the sewer to eliminate a bandit as a warning. The whole story fit perfectly, and the culprit was certainly the guard with bandages on his head. The noble grits his teeth, annoyed upon realizing the true dirty nature of those false heroes. Walking through the corridors, the silver-haired boy decides he needs to do something about these knights. He concludes that the warriors are not the shield of the kingdom, but a plague that needs to be cut out. Arriving at the dungeon area, the protagonist approaches a guard on duty with firm steps. The soldier is surprised by the visit, questioning what brought the boy to that gloomy place. Being very direct, the young man asks if the prisoner convicted of rebellion was being held inside. Through the heavy iron bars, we can see a dark-haired man bound by chains. Ignoring the guard's surprise, the young master announces in a loud and clear voice that he has come to visit that inmate. Hearing this different voice, the mysterious prisoner opens one of his eyes, revealing a deadly gaze. The guy wants to find out if the Knights of Winterband are working together with Niers and their crimes. So he asks the prisoner if he knows this Niers person and waits for a response. The young master mentions he heard the group is involved in human trafficking. Knowing how heavy that accusation is, the prisoner just clenches his fists in anger, staying completely silent. He keeps a very serious face and stays quiet for a little while, saying absolutely nothing. Our hero finds the guy's face very familiar, but he can't quite remember where he knows him from. He continues the interrogation, wanting to know what the connection is between the underground operations and the company's boss. But the dark-haired guy remains silent and doesn't even turn around to look at the nobleman. Then, out of nowhere, the inmate warns that he will talk only once about everything that happened. With a very quick movement, he steps close and grabs the iron bars of the cell in anger. The prisoner yells furiously that he knows absolutely nothing about the matter he just mentioned. The white-haired boy looks at the guy very seriously, completely ignoring all that shouting. Changing the subject, the inmate asks what the name of the young master standing in front of him is. With a slight smile, the protagonist replies that his name is Carlson and stares intently at the guy. Then the hare says he remembers everything and asks if he'll keep lying while calling him Kyle. Hearing his real name, the guy is totally shocked, not even knowing how to react at that moment. He steps away from the cell bars, taking a few steps back, terrified by that revelation. The prisoner named Kyle then asks how the boy found out that secret name of his. The nobleman remembers hearing the name Kyle for the first time during the kingdom's civil war. That entire massive conflict started right at the succession ceremony for the old king's throne. The second prince, who lost the war for the crown, betrayed everyone by allying himself with the empire. Because of this, he caused a tragedy at the party, leaving the crown stained with the blood of innocent people. After the kingdom was overtaken, the people rebelled, and the leader of that uprising was Kyle himself. Kyle was now pretending to be Carlson and doesn't understand how the kid uncovered his real identity. The white-haired boy says he only read about his life in a very famous book. The book was called The Chronicles of Villains and told the stories of a lot of criminals. The coolest part was that the book said Kyle would become the seventh sword master of that place. And seeing the guy in person, our hero completely agrees with what was written in the book. He notices the bizarre amount of mana Kyle possesses and how well trained the guy seems to be. The young master thinks about the level of strength Kyle will have once he unleashes his power. Kyle gets angry and demands that he explain how he knows all this about his life during the rebellion. The boy laughs and tells him not to be surprised, as he also knows he is the son of that Cation guy. Shocked by another piece of information about his family, the inmate asks who the boy really is. The nobleman asks why he doesn't recognize the eldest son of the Goethe family, making the guy upset. Kyle wants to know the real reason for the visit, and the boy says he doesn't care about a simple mercenary, especially one who vanished from the map more than 10 years ago, leaving the prisoner absolutely furious. Kyle asks if he is Isaac, and the young man says he doesn't care whether the guy believes his word or not. With a very serious and focused look, he prepares to ask the question that truly matters. The white-haired boy wants to know the reason why the company's boss is trafficking so many people. Near a candle, Kyle says that if he really is the young master, things change completely. The hero then says that this is all the more reason for the guy to answer everything he wants to know. With his arms crossed, the kid thinks about what he will do if the conversation doesn't lead anywhere good. He warns that the commander can blame the guy for Nier's crimes, making him a wanted man. Because of that, Kyle wouldn't even be able to start his revenge against the people who betrayed him. The prisoner clenches his hands again, thinking about how complicated his current situation is. The dark-haired guy remains silent, looking like he's facing a major dilemma right now. The two stand still in the dark cell, with the nobleman waiting for an answer from the silent prisoner. The white-haired boy thinks that Kyle isn't foolish enough to be manipulated like his butler was. Seeing that he won't get anything, the hero turns around to leave and try to come up with a new plan. So he decides he has no choice but to draw all the enemies' attention to himself. Changing scenes, you can see a drop of water falling into a puddle in a very dark and damp place. Two hooded guys walk down a stone corridor, looking like they are on a secret mission. One of them finds it strange that there are no Nier's guards around and wonders what happened. With that, his partner points to something right ahead and tells the other to look very closely. They find the cages where the merchandise was kept empty and get very angry about it. Apparently, the new boss stopped the bribes and called the guys to settle the dispute right away. They wonder if the new Niers will cancel their deal and open the door very slowly. But when they open the door, both get a surprise from the person who was waiting on the other side. The protagonist's butler greets the guys with a forced smile, sweating coldly from pure fear. With a very polite gesture, he asks the two of them to enter the room, his voice trembling completely. The hooded men find it bizarre that a Nier's employee is wearing the clothes of an ordinary servant. Besides, they notice very well that the man wasn't carrying any kind of weapon with him there. Suspicious of the situation, the two look at each other for a moment before making a final decision. So they enter the room and walk very slowly down the corridor, holding their swords in their hands. With a very serious look, the leader of the group prepares to come face to face with the new boss of Niers. They enter a dark room and see a guy sitting at a table lit by a burning candle. The hooded man asks if he is the new boss and complains about being summoned without any warning. He even makes a threat, saying the kid must think he has 9 lives to play around like this. The boy asks if he can say something, leaving the two men very surprised and confused. They find that childish voice strange and notice that the new boss was just a very young kid. With the candle in his hand, the protagonist asks the reason why they did that and stares at the guys. The leader of the hooded men starts sweating coldly when he recognizes the boy and gets terrified. Out of nowhere, one of the men attacks his own partner and forces the guy to kneel down on the floor. The leader yells at his companion, asking what he is doing, and tells him to get down on the ground. The man gets desperate and asks if his friend doesn't know who the kid in front of them is. He turns to the protagonist, saying it's very good to see him again, while his friend bows down. The white-haired boy with a hood offers a cup to both of them with a very calm smile. Knights Fickle and Randolph are in total shock to see that the young Master Isaac was the boss of everything.